Now it's time to bring out our second guest, who is a thoughtful writer closely following this legalization conversation that we talk about every week here on the show. It's my pleasure to welcome Cannabis Benchmarks editorial director Adam Coe to the Cannabist Show. Hey, man.
Hey, Ricardo.
Pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. We've communicated vaguely over the years, and this is the first time we're meeting. It's so great.
IRL.
IRL.
In the age of online communication.
No shit, isn't it weird?
It's odd, yes.
Oh, man. So, Adam.
Yes.
Sativa, indica, where are you on the spectrum?
You know, in my previous position, I was actually a grower managing a cultivation facility here, and in my experience growing and also, you know, partaking a little bit, I've sort of come to the opinion that those distinctions perhaps aren't as meaningful as we make them out to be right now.
Sure.
And you know, because I've had the opportunity to grow the same strain under different conditions with different types of fertilization and what have you. And, you know, it changes the aroma, it changes the effects.
Interesting,
so, you know, it's obviously exciting times, and I think as research progresses, we'll get a fuller picture of, you know, how terpenes play a role, alkanes, all the different various compounds that I don't fully understand that are better left to the chemists, how they affect us. And you know, maybe that sativa indica question will be a little different in a couple years when you're doing this show. You
know, it's interesting because, of course, we know that there's no true sativa, no true indica. It's like indica dominant. You know, most everything is a hybrid out there, popular. Science tells us that. And we had Max Montrose from the Trichome Institute on the couch for like 6 weeks ago. And, of course, he just went off on that question and completely dismissed it. At the same time, Adam, you're an ex-grower. Now you write in the field. Do you agree that some marijuana makes you sleepy and some makes you energized?
I do agree, and also though I think you have to look at you know, your own body chemistry at the time. I think everyone that's you know, consumed cannabis has had the occasion where they've smoked a joint of Durban poison at one time and they get a nice rush, and then maybe another instance they get a little sleepy. So you know, it's a lot of nuance, a lot of variables, I think, that go into everything. You know, but for me, I guess to answer your original question in a sort of indirect way, I would prefer, now that I've been able to get out of the warehouse and see the industry more broadly, I really prefer sun-grown cannabis that's fertilized naturally, not with, you know, bottled nutrients, with sort of natural inputs, guano, kelp, things like that.
Sure.
And, you know, for me, that I think that results in the best product in the hands of a grower that really knows what they're doing.
I spent a lot of time in California in October doing a lot of reporting pre-election and everything, and it was cool and so fun to see how big sun-grown is out there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when you're in the shop, there's a distinction, you know, and of course everything out there is still the Wild West, and in the meantime we only have one county that allows outdoor cultivation in the state of Colorado, and so sun-grown is pretty unique here, especially because if you're growing your 6 plants, your 12 plants at home, you're not supposed to be growing it under the sun, even though some of my friends do.
Right, very different from the West Coast, for sure.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, catch us up on what's happening at Cannabis Benchmarks.
Yeah, of course. So Cannabis Benchmarks, we are an independent, unbiased price reporting agency. So, you know, we have actually for over a year and a half now been publishing weekly market price assessments on wholesale cannabis flower. So separate from a company like BDS, which is focused on the retail side, we're focused on the supply side, producers of cannabis. And
multiple markets or Colorado only? Multiple
markets. Okay. We do a national volume weighted average, which is a little premature, obviously, because we don't have interstate commerce yet, but each week in our weekly reports, we cover California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington. Those are the big four right now, of course. And then also we have good data on Arizona, Michigan, Nevada. Nevada's obviously a big up-and-coming state. And you know, some other of the smaller medical markets as well. And you know, just to sort of give some context, price reporting agencies are really a key feature in all commodity markets, right?
Sure.
So all agricultural products, oil and gas.
It's why Bloomberg is Bloomberg.
Right, exactly. And actually a good portion of the team is coming from that field, from places like S&P, Standard & Poor, and Platts, McGraw-Hill, and they're sort of the number crunchers that have brought their methods that they used in other commodity data areas and applied it to cannabis.
Okay.
You know, and a lot of it is, to be perfectly frank, a little bit out of my depth. It's a little technical, but we do have, for those that are interested, we do have methodology documents on the website. So if you want to do a deep dive, that info's there. But really the goal is price transparency. And that's really important to making sure that the market's functioning efficiently and really that everyone's winning. So, you know, to give an example, if you're going to buy a used car, right, you're not going to just take the price that the dealer offers
Sure.
you, right?
There's a thing called Kelley Blue Book that you might be checking.
There you go. Yeah, you're one step ahead of me. So you check the Kelley Blue Book for the make, model, the year. You go check out the car itself, you know, if they change the oil and what have you. And then you can negotiate. You have a starting point, a reference point, and get to a place where there's a deal agreeable to both parties. Whereas if you didn't have that information, there's, you know, a good chance you might get ripped off. And that might be good for the dealer, but it's not good for the market in the long run.
Right, right.
So we're basically trying to do the same thing. And, you know, in the end, I think we'd like to be considered the Kelley Blue Book of cannabis. You know, and it's something that really resonated with me from my previous experience working in the industry directly. You know, we got to a point where we had expanded our cultivation operation and we were starting to wholesale more on the open market. And I observed that it was hard to do deals sometimes because, you know, we were coming at it from one angle. We said, hey, this is our best stuff. We love it. All our patients love it in the dispensary we're integrated with. And, you know, we think maybe $2,600, $2,800. You know, those were the good old days, I suppose.
I was going to say, that's not a modern number.
Right, no. I've been out for a little over a year and a half now. But yeah, but we'd have buyers coming to us saying, well, we never pay more than 18 or 16, which nowadays some people might be happy to have. But back then it was a little insulting sometimes. So, and we would get into these sort of stalemate negotiations because there was no reference point. You know, there was no way to really meet in the middle or nowhere to jump off from. So, you know, when I was first approached with this opportunity, I just thought, wow, you know, I wish that I had that when I was a grower and I could see the value that it brought to the market.
Sure, yeah, no, you need that reference point. I think both sides, it just helps for an even playing field. And before we move on, what is the average per pound wholesale price in Colorado right now?
Right now in Colorado, we're tracking it around just above $1,400 per pound. So, you know, a big difference from, like I said, a year or two ago when the recreational market opened and, you know, demand was booming and some of the new licensees were still trying to come online. So we actually, this July, saw a big sort of price crash. And I think a lot of people were expecting it. Some people may have been lulled into thinking it might not happen, but, you know, a lot of the big greenhouse operations that you sort of alluded to earlier down south in the Pueblo area,
Came online,
yeah.
Had
you know,
some harvests.
Right. It doesn't happen overnight, of course. So, you know, even though the market, they might have gotten their license in 2014 sometime, you know, they had to raise capital, they had to build, and then they had to get going and hit their stride. But they did this summer, and the prices dropped precipitously.
And has it leveled out, steadied? Has it risen since July?
It has leveled out for the most part. You know, and the holiday time is, you know, last year we saw this as well around the Thanksgiving and the Christmas, New Year's period. That's a time when demand goes up a little. People are off of work, socializing more, and then, you know, as you get later into the winter, you get the more tourists coming in. So, you know, we had that big rush of supply in the summer, but it leveled off eventually, and we actually the last couple weeks saw a little bump over in the lead up to Thanksgiving.
What's funny is in the last couple weeks, I definitely found myself stocking up.
Oh yeah.
You have friends and family coming in from out of town. You're busy as hell during the holidays. I don't have time to go over to the pot shop. So
need a little break.
Adam, you and I first met online when you were writing about pesticides. I was writing about pesticides. This is one of our shared passions, and I really appreciated your writing that you did on that.
Thank you.
I want to know if you think Colorado or any other states have started to figure out this pesticide issue. Where do you think we're at with it?
Well, it's hard to figure something out when you don't have all the information that you need to make an informed decision, right? And the unfortunate thing is, due to the decades of drug war rhetoric and the pretty unfair, I think in all respects, classification as a Schedule I substance, we just haven't had the opportunity to do research on cannabis like we do with other crops, and how pesticides might be able to be used in a safe manner. So, given that knowledge gap, I think that the CDA, who is sort of primarily tasked with developing the pesticide policies, I
That's
think
the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, sorry,
No worries.
Department
You're
of
good.
Agriculture. I think they've taken the best possible course here, and there's something that is a little more prevalent in Europe. It's called the precautionary principle. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not, no.
It's sort of a philosophy to guide regulatory decisions that might affect public health or environmental issues. So basically the gist of it is...
Better safe than sorry, maybe.
There you go, yeah. When a new product or services or process is being introduced, if there's a potential for a public health impact or a negative environmental impact, we need to wait and see conclusive data before it's adopted. And so in Europe, they're a little more inclined to take that position. For example, in Western Europe, they haven't really accepted genetically modified crops like we have here in the United States. They're still waiting on data even after 20 years. So it's a different view, and I think that sort of view has governed the CDA and also the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, the CDPHE. We just don't know, but the CDA did identify, that class of minimum risk products where it's legal to use those according to our federal pesticide laws. They don't necessarily say that they're safe, but that's the option we have, and sort of, like Tyler said, we're sort of put in these positions where we have to sort of find this best path to tread, and right now, given what we don't know, I think that that's the good stance. I think more could be done in terms of maybe enforcement, inspection, and getting the testing program, which I know is under construction, off the ground. But these are really complex issues, and I don't want to sound like I'm being overly critical, because it takes a long time to figure out these laboratory processes and sampling procedures and everything, and making sure they're right and they're effective and they're not too burdensome on the market participants.
It's a good point to make, though. We still do not have a state-sanctioned lab to test for pesticides, even though the 3 other areas of potency and microbials and contaminants have been tested for in some cases, years in this state, and we're still waiting on pesticides.
Yeah, and it's interesting to, I don't know how much you've been following Oregon, but...
Yeah, some interesting things happening up there, for sure.
Yeah, so Oregon's had an interesting couple Octobers, the last 2. This October, I guess, to sort of stay on topic here, on October 1st, they introduced really strict pesticide testing regulations, more stringent than really anything that any other state's done to this point. They're screening for 59 separate chemicals.
Oh, wow. And down to parts per billion, or?
They're depending on the individual chemical, there's different action levels. And then they're also having lab representatives pull samples instead of the producers
Oh,
themselves. And then finally, the other thing they're doing different than Colorado is a maximum 10-pound batch size. So, here in Colorado, through the metric system, you can, a batch could be 1 pound or it could be 200 pounds, right? And in Oregon, even if you're cutting down 200 pounds at a time, you're going to have to divvy that up, and each 10 pounds is going to have to clear screening before it can be allowed to be transferred to a retail store. And so, that was interesting to see this October when, like we said, on the West Coast with the sun grown, that's usually a time when supply's flooding in and prices are going down. But in Oregon, with this testing regime being put in place, we actually saw where Washington and California, were going like this, Oregon was going like this, because the testing was taking longer. There weren't enough labs online initially because the requirements for the labs were very stringent to meet, and it took a little longer than anticipated. So when the stores opened on October 1st, there were, I think, maybe around 6 or 8 labs operational, and they were just getting slammed with product. And so the product was sort of trickling out on the other side very slowly. Supply was tight.
I've heard from colleagues
prices
there,
were going up.
It's really affected the concentrates market.
Yeah, that as well. Right now with Benchmarks, we're focused on flower, but speaking to some industry group leaders up there, sort of the analog to what Tyler does. The concentrates are definitely, they're being subjected to really strict standards as well, and it's really expensive, but I think there's something to be said for just sort of ripping the Band-Aid off, maybe, because they are going through a growing pains period right now, and I'm sure that a lot of the producers and the processors are having a tough time, and I do feel for them because I've been through those big regulatory shifts as a grower myself.
Sure.
But I think once they get through this, it'll be a lot smoother sailing, rather than perhaps trying to implement standards retroactively, as is the case in California, where people have been doing their thing for 20 years now, and I don't envy anyone in that market trying to shape that up.
Oh no, especially with all that outdoor grown. There's a lot more pests outside than there is inside a warehouse. But I look forward to seeing what Colorado ends up doing and what we pick from Oregon, what we don't.
Right.
But one thing I definitely wanted to talk with you about, since you're here, something we've talked about before. You have an interesting theory that you're not so sure that the commercial legalization course that Colorado has taken is the right one, and I want to dig in because I want to hear your thoughts on what's wrong with the current system and what could have been done better.
Yeah. So that's a big issue. We could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, we could.
At the risk of sounding like one of the the SAM.
Project Sam.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm
big anti-legalization
right.
group.
I'm not really of that mind. I think, I'm definitely a legalization proponent. I don't think anyone should ever go to jail for carrying a reasonable amount of cannabis for their needs, whether medical or adult use. I think people, in an ideal world, people should be able to grow a few plants in their garden if they want. Obviously, there's some complications to that, but eventually we get there. And in general, I think I'm of a similar mind to Tyler that, people should be free to do what they want as long as they know the risks and they are okay with them, and as long as they're not hurting anyone else, So, unfortunately, things aren't that simple in the real world because every action does have consequences, and, this is what people voted on, and this is where we are, so we really have to make the best of it.
And I know it's kind of a big question, but getting narrow, especially with how quickly we moved through that rulemaking process. I mean, we voted in November 2012 and shops were open 13 months later.
That's true.
And I get the impression you think that might have been a little bit quick. Of course, Washington State took 5.5 months longer than we did to start the sales.
Too. And I mean, they didn't necessarily avoid the problems even taking a little longer.
Sure.
So, we're in uncharted territory. So, hindsight's 2020. It's easy for me to sit here and say there's problems. Maybe we should have done things differently. I think really, rather than recommending anything, specific, because, obviously I can't see the future. I can't really see how anything would work out. I think something that would really be beneficial overall, and some people are absolutely taking this tact already, but there's an idea called Socratic Ignorance. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
So, the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, the way Plato tells it, there was an oracle that said Socrates is the wisest man in Greece. And then when he was presented with that idea, he said, well, that's funny, I didn't know that. And he tries to figure out why that would be the case. And he comes to the conclusion that he's not wise because he knows more than everyone else, but he's aware of what he doesn't know. And he acknowledges his own ignorance.
Sure.
And so he always is asking questions and trying to fill the gaps in his knowledge. And
I'm familiar with the idea.
Right,
okay.
yeah. So, we are, again, sort of the pesticide situation's a microcosm of that. We're in this situation with cannabis where the anecdotal evidence for the medical side is extremely compelling and really, powerful. We have some great preliminary studies that point to some really positive outcomes, but I think if you ask people in those fields, they'll all tell you that we don't have any definitive conclusions based on hard data yet, right? And it's going to take, in some cases, 5, 10, maybe even 20 years or longer to really figure out the full effects of what we're doing here. So, this is an experiment, and as we move forward, I just think that, we have to really sort of similar to what you and Tyler were discussing, it's an exciting time, there's so much promise, but we have to guard against sort of this overriding optimism and perhaps, make sure we don't overstate something to the detriment of, having a possible negative outcome come back and bite us in the future, because, and I really appreciate your sort of measured take on it. It's really great to hear that's sort of the message that's being conveyed to lawmakers, but then you do hear some statements like cannabis is safer than alcohol. And, of course you're not going to overdose on cannabis, that's for sure, but that's also a very vague statement, right? So is it safer when one individual might be consuming, 2 or 3 glasses of wine a week compared to an individual that's dabbing 2 or 3 times a day, which is safer? I don't know.
Yeah, it's relative.
We don't have the research, and I think we just have to, there's going to be some people that are against legalization no matter what, and there's obviously the advocates that feel strongly, and then there's that group in the middle. And for speaking to those people that are ready to consider evidence and sort of make an informed decision, I think we have to say to them, look, there's a lot of compelling reasons to legalize cannabis, but we don't have all the answers, but we're committed to doing this experiment responsibly and cautiously and just making sure that it's as beneficial to as many people as possible and not sort of, again, replicating a situation like what happened with tobacco, because, and I hope this doesn't happen, but if there are perhaps a public health problem or something like that a decade or so down the road, then that just gives ammunition to the anti-cannabis types to say, hey, you lied to us and blah, 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 and maybe there is sort of a backlash. Again, that's a worst case scenario. I'm sort of a worrywart.
Well, you're reasoned, and going back to our pal Socrates, I think it's important to acknowledge, as we do all the time on the show, that there's still more that we don't know about this plant than what we do know.
Tip of the iceberg.
It's so fascinating. I was just looking through some of a buddy of mine went to school in Texas in the 70s, and he gave me all these all these like pamphlets basically that he was given as a student about drugs, and the marijuana ones are amazing, and they acknowledged then the issues with research, and here we are 40 years later, and there are still very real issues with research, and I couldn't agree more with what you said about the pesticide stuff, because as we're reporting about this, it's like, okay, these people are getting caught using chemicals, pesticide chemicals that are not okay for this plant. Do we know that they're going to harm you if you inhale them and expose them to flame? No, we don't. But that might be something that you learn 20, 30 years down the line when these people try to procreate and sudden issues come up, as has happened with other pesticide issues in the decades past. So and I think it's important to acknowledge all that stuff.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing too is just the amount of time it takes and the amount of money it takes too to do that sort of research. So, you know, hopefully, I know there's already, you know, down at CSU Pueblo, they're starting sort of a cannabis research center. So there is that commitment happening, and I think that's probably one of the most important things that the industry can do. Is just drive the research forward, stay open-minded, and be, you know, honest about the scientific findings that come forward, and, you know, we can use that to make good decisions and make legalization work.
I remember when I first took this job, I really did a deep dive because I wasn't super knowledgeable about marijuana coming into this, and talking to public health experts, it was fascinating learning about some of those massive studies involving tens of thousands of people that were conducted in the 60s and 70s, which is why we know what we know about alcohol and tobacco, and we desperately need those for marijuana, and we won't have them for a while, and you're right. I mean, in many ways, it comes back to that really off-tone public education campaign that the governor tried to do with the lab rat cages. Don't be a lab rat. Well, we are lab rats in many ways.
A little bit, yeah.
You know, given what we know, but we're moving forward. Tyler, I want to bring you back into the conversation. I mean, you've been on the front lines of cannabis legislation for 2 years. Adam, clearly you've been paying a lot of attention to this, so I want to know what each of you guys think is the next big issue that Colorado weed is going to face, whether it's in the state legislature, whether it's in the movement against legalization. Tyler, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot that, you know, for this industry, I mean, since it's so new, I mean, everything is a huge step. But, you know, moving forward, you know, for this industry, I'd like to mention, you know, one of the biggest accomplishments, you know, so far from this election cycle was the defeat of Initiative 200 in Pueblo. You know, that would have had such a detrimental effect on Pueblo's economy, but on just the movement in general across the country. You know, that would have been the playbook for groups like Project SAM and Smart Colorado here to take that to other states and around the local municipalities here in Colorado and just be a domino effect.
And that's a good point. Just in case our listeners weren't following, there were some activists in a southern Colorado city that tried to block all recreational pot licenses, and they failed. So, that was a big one.
Failed, and now they're going to have a pot museum now.
The National Marijuana Museum,
there. But you know, I think moving forward, since, you know, our next legislative session starts in January here, you know, there's two things that I look at as the biggest one. I think, well, first of all, the biggest one I think is going to be the consumption, social consumption of marijuana in a public place. We saw that with Initiative 300 here, and then we also, you know, saw some of, you know, the back end playing of that, of you know, with the state working behind the scenes to prohibit liquor, people who hold a liquor license from allowing the consumption of cannabis. You know, that rule was adopted by Liquor Enforcement Division, you know, to kind of stem that tide, you know, from Denver here, which you know, is something that needs to be addressed and looked at for the state. Is we need some place for tourists and people outside their homes to go and consume socially, and they do it in a responsible manner. You know, a vast number of folks who live in who don't own their own homes, who live in apartments, townhomes, and whatnot, where it's strictly prohibited from using these products on site. They need a place. We have that for alcohol. We have those for premium cigars, where you can
yes,
go
we do.
For there. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and unfortunately a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but I think the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish that is to put an exemption in the Colorado Clean Indoor Smoking Act. to allow that. And that's a heavy lift for a lot of folks, not just in the cannabis industry here, but for regulators, people from the American Heart Association, Lung Association, people who fought so vehemently to remove tobacco from places like restaurants and bars and casinos. But this is something that needs to be addressed, and it'll be a heavy lift, but I believe the industry can accomplish it.
Interesting. Okay.
I also think tax reform too is something that's key, and if it doesn't happen this year, it needs to be looked at, just because for general business implications, having a fluctuating tax rate, it's no way to do business, and especially if we're supposed to be regulated similar to alcohol. I think a flat tax rate's important, so that's something that this industry should look at. The governor's has a big push, you've seen, of going after the gray and black market. I think that's going to be huge, and that's going to be something the industry really needs to keep on their toes to ensure that it doesn't encroach, any policy doesn't encroach on the licensed and regulated industry, but it also protects the caregivers who are doing it right, who are in areas who their local municipalities have prohibited medical or recreational, ensuring that those folks aren't left in the dark.
And that's a good point. I mean, there's 3 solid points. That last one, I'm curious though, as a lobbyist, when you see the governor of Colorado addressing these gray market, black market cultivations, do you watch that and say, wow, this could encroach on the legal market?
Yeah, from my perspective, looking at working for C4 and getting to know all these businesses across the state of Colorado and outside of Colorado, it does a little bit worrisome because we kind of sit in a little bubble here, and if you look at those same news articles and you're living in places like Iowa, or you're living in North Carolina, South Carolina, illegal black market, gray market, licensed, regulated product, it's all the same. And that's the worry too, is being able to differentiate the two. I think it is an issue, it is a problem. A lot of people want to kind of just put it under the rug over there, but we're surrounded by states that don't have medical or recreational marijuana, and there are going to be positive and negative consequences, and the negative consequence of this is Colorado now being the middle of the country, it does make it easier and more profitable for folks to grow illegal product and ship this to other states, especially on the East Coast. It's something that this industry sees and knows it's a threat there, because just in generalities, legal weed, illegal weed, to some people outside of Colorado, people don't pay attention, it's all the same.
Sure.
And so being very cautious and sure that we're not encroaching on these businesses is going to be key, but it's also supporting the efforts to ensure that black market product is not making its way on the streets, because your black market dealer doesn't care if you're under the age of 21. You don't know how this product is grown, you don't know where it's grown. These people are just growing to produce a large quantity of product and ship it out of state. And so I think the governor's got his work cut out for him, and I hope the industry can get behind what he's doing, but ensuring that they're protecting the rights of businesses and they're protecting the rights of the legitimate caregivers who are doing a phenomenal job. So,
Adam, what are your thoughts? One or two of these next big issues that Colorado weed is going to be facing here in the next legislature, but also, beyond? Yeah,
I think looking beyond and picking up on something Tyler mentioned about the tax structure, because our regulated industry here in Colorado was really built on indoor operations, right? There was no greenhouse, there was really no legal outdoor at the outset, and so the rules were written to tailor to what people were doing. But like I sort of mentioned earlier this year, with the way prices are going and the influence that these big greenhouse and outdoor operations in southern Colorado are having, the market's changing, and I think some of the rules, particularly around taxation, are going to have to be examined. And it's interesting to look in California, even though their statewide system is still under construction, some of the local governments in places like Humboldt and Mendocino County that have those long histories of cannabis cultivation, they're imposing tax rates on growers not by a percentage of a sale price, but by the square footage of their canopy. So, $1 per square foot of canopy for outdoor growers, $3 for indoor growers.
So when you talk about taxation, you're talking about wholesale?
Yes, on the wholesale side. And so...
Because then there's 280E on the
right,
retail
yeah, no,
side.
I'm not even going to get into that. But it's something that, with the way that prices went this year in Colorado, growers are actually paying a higher effective tax rate because that rate was set earlier in the year when prices were higher. And so after they fell, if you're not getting 1,800 per pound for your product, which was what the rate was based on for the second half of this year, which is not the market reality at this point, then you're getting taxed higher than that 15% effectively. And so, like Tyler said, we'll have to see how the market sort of transforms itself. Keep an eye on California and Oregon and some of these other places with the new approaches that they're trying. And if sun-grown and other sort of methods do become more prevalent here, maybe there has to be, a significant restructuring. And again, for what we're doing with benchmarks, it was really exciting. We normally keep our subscriber information confidential, but this is actually a case where it became public knowledge. Outside of us, the administrators in Mendocino County, it came out in a board of supervisors meeting there that they were using our price assessments to sort of help formulate an appropriate tax rate where, they could bring in the revenue that they desired to the county, but that they were also not taking too big of a chunk out of the growers' revenues.
Sure. Okay.
So,
that's pretty progressive.
Yeah. So, it's like I said, it's an ongoing thing, and I don't know that anyone has definitive answers at this point. We just have to continue to listen and be responsive, and try to collect as much information as possible so we can make those good decisions.
Well, I have a follow-up for both of you guys, because I was on NPR the other day, and I think they asked me the same thing, and I was like, the next big issue, just pulled the first thing off the top of my head, and I was like, potency. Potency, big issue this last year. Industry, rallied around, raised a ton of money, fought the issue, fought it down. Do you guys see this issue of this increasing marijuana flower potency and, of course, very high concentrates and extracts potency being a concern for the industry, but also for the opposition? Tyler?
Oh, you want to go there? So that was very interesting when that came up the last legislative session around potency, which really, it put the industry on guard, had to stand their toes for there, because there was an initiative that got filed to try to cap potency, and it was at least interesting for us in the industry folks there, because the individuals pushing this cap on potency, when you asked them to explain what potency was, they couldn't provide an answer for you. But it's a great soundbite to put out a high number like 99%, and make it sound dangerous and get people to be like, oh, I have no idea what that means, but it sounds scary. And because marijuana is still taboo, unfortunately, across this country, I don't know what it means, but it's a high number. It's got to be bad. Unfortunately, it comes down. It's the same thing we go to alcohol. It's like a difference between beer to wine to spirits.
Sure.
All have different alcohol contents. You all have different amounts of consumption there, but it all comes down to the responsibility of the consumer to use those products there. And again, at least I guess the science is on our side, because really there is no science from there, and so there's no way to definitively say if it's a danger for you. But I think the defeat at the initiative was a good jumping off point for us. I think maybe the industry will see some type of legislation next year. I don't see it catching any legs. And the reason being for that is after this election, we have a divided chambers. The Senate maintained Republican, the House remained Democrat. I know for C4's position, we're very happy to see that there, because that means the extreme legislation from either side of the aisle, from the right side or the left, isn't going to get passed. Everything has to be brought to a compromise to get any sensible regulations, and capping potency just isn't sensible. There's no definitive argument to why we need to do that. It comes down to consumer education, and I think the state with the Good to Know campaign, and plus the industry itself doing self-regulatory practices is where it needs to be. And so if it does come, I think it would die a quick death in the first committee that was put in. So,
Adam, what's your thought? You think potency has a chance at being a thorn in the industry's side?
It might get brought up again, but I'm of the same mind as Tyler. There's not really any good arguments, and I think as the public in general becomes more educated about cannabis, that the potency sort of scare tactic will become less and less effective. I know in my own personal experience as a grower, I had the opportunity to bring up the crops, have them tested, and then I would do a little sampling, make sure the product was okay, and
A little bit of quality control.
Exactly, but there were times when we had a batch come back at around 30% THC, and that product didn't hit me as hard as a batch that tested at 19% THC, and so that sort of goes back to the beginning of our conversations. What else is going on here that's bringing these effects
affecting
about
our body and
right.
our minds.
And then again, from the grower's perspective, it's just not a realistic idea in general, because we're not manufacturing widgets here. We're not making 200 milligram tablets of ibuprofen. We're growing plants, and they're living beings. And as even with the most consistent, well-run operations, you're going to have some variability. And so, are you going to make a grower throw out a whole crop because it's 17% THC versus 16%, when in the end we don't even really know if that's a meaningful difference?
Sure.
So, like I said, it's something I think born of just lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. And as things move forward, it'll be a less effective scare tactic for those that might try to want to undermine the industry in that way.
I appreciate both of your guys' take on it.
Yeah.
I could have been wrong when I gave that answer, but you guys, it's time for the pod quiz.
Oh.
This is all current events, all the time, 2 questions apiece. If you get the wrong answer, you can steal the point, and vice versa.
Okay.
Tyler, first question's coming to you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
And this actually comes from the quick hit. So viewers, listeners, you guys know this answer. You guys don't, because we don't listen to the quick hit in the studio. But Tyler, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper hopes to use how much of the state's marijuana tax revenues to fight homelessness?
Oh, man.
A,
Okay.
8.2 million. B, 10.7 million. C, 12.3 million. D, 15.1 million.
Oh man, because I just saw this the other day, and I was reading over the Joint Budget Committee report. I think it's D.
D.
Is it D?
15.1 million? No.
No.
That is the wrong
man,
answer.
I really thought theirs. Okay, you go for the
Adam
steal.
for the steal.
I got a little easier, but I'm going to say C, 12.3.
Ding is right.
Yeah.
Yes. Good
I knew it was in the
guess.
tens. I knew it was in the double digits.
You helped me out a little bit there. So.
There you go. Well, now you can pay him back if you want to, Adam,
Okay.
unless you get this point as well. Are you ready for the next question?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Legalization opponents in Maine have requested a recount on the ballot initiative that narrowly legalized recreational cannabis use. How long will that recount take, according to the state's Department of the Secretary of State? A, 2 to 3 weeks. B, 4 to 6 weeks. C, 8 to 10 weeks. D, 12 to 14 weeks.
I read about this last week. I think it's B, 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow, you're on fire, dude. Okay, props.
It's my
Somebody
job.
did their studying.
Yeah.
I know, Tyler's moved on. He's
I'm
like,
moved on
"Oh,
already, yeah.
where's the
I've
cigars?"
already checked
Where's the
out.
cigar questions, right?
Tyler, next question goes to you.
This could be embarrassing. My last year.
Here you go. You have an opportunity to make up for it. The U.S. Supreme Court this week refused to take up an appeal from a Native American church that wants to be exempt from federal marijuana laws. In what MMJ legal state is the Native American church located in? So this is a medical legal state.
Oh man. I just breezed over that when it was on CNN and stuff. A medical legal state for the church, Cannabis Church. Oh man. I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna get this one wrong, but is it Montana? I didn't hear the ding. I didn't hear the ding. I'm already out of here. I'm done.
You can still steal the next question. Adam, you have a guess?
Yeah, and this is going to be a guess. This is a tough one.
It is a tough one. I apologize.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Tough quiz.
Michigan?
No. Hawaii.
Hawaii.
Okay.
All
Oh,
right.
yes. Yes, I couldn't
Do I get
pronounce.
half point because I was the closest, maybe? Last
Closest geographically.
These were way easier when there were a lot less MMJ legal states.
That's
too.
true,
That
too.
is, that's true.
no
That's true.
doubt, right? Well, this one's a little bit simpler. Adam, last question of the pot quiz. A recreational pot shop in what 420 legal state has delayed its mid-December opening after the store was broken into on, of all days, Thanksgiving?
Is this Oregon?
No.
No? Oh, man.
No. To Tyler for the
Right.
steal.
That's broken.
It's a recreational
This is
pot
your
shop.
moment.
This is mine while I was comatose from Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I don't remember
I took
anything
a break
from
from the
Thanksgiving.
news then.
They were about to open in mid-December, and now they're having to postpone because they were broken into. $5K worth of technology stolen on Thanksgiving.
Wow. For recreational? In a recreational state from opening. Is it Oregon?
He guessed Oregon.
Oh, did he guess Oregon? Oh. Never me paying attention. I'm already checked out. I swear I'm not
give
under
him
the
another
influence on there. I think that's delayed. That's a recreational state. I'm trying to think. Oh, well, they haven't opened yet. They haven't opened. So you leave Colorado, Alaska. You know what? I should say Colorado, but you know what? I'm gonna go Alaska since they opened.
Oh,
there we
get
go.
the point. Pulls it out.
There we go.
Nice.
Pulls it out. Perfect.
You guys, thanks so much. Awesome
you, Ricardo.
conversation. Such a
Appreciate it.
pleasure
Yeah.
meeting you. Dude,
Oh,
great to
thank
see
you
you
so
guys.
much.
Absolutely. I want to thank my guests, Tyler Henson and Adam Coe, but most importantly, thanks to you all for watching, listening, and reading. So appreciate it. So I'm Ricardo Baca, joined by producers Vince, Don, and the rest of the crew. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you next week.
Sound the truth. I'm allowed to lose, I choose to win. I'm all in, I'm calling any posse you'll be raising at the end. I say it again, ain't afraid to get in. I'll be going for the jackpot with aces in my hand, I'm raw.
Your show.